that was a lovely face right there. You did what? So yes, I did. 40 years ago, I was indeed the negotiator for the Walk to Moscow project. And at the time, the doomsday clock stood at 4 minutes to midnight. And like thousands of others, I was convinced that nuclear war was a tangible threat, a real possibility. I was 26 at the time. Just one moment. I meant to give myself a timer, and I haven't started it, so that's a good start, isn't it? Just a minute. Oh no, it's...
We've got as much time as you need.
Well, I was told half an hour, so I'm going to try and do that. There we go. Yeah, I was 26 at the time. I was just starting out on my career as a Baroque violinist. Now, if you know what that is, you're a special person indeed, because most people wouldn't know what Baroque violin was if it came and hit you in the face. But I'd been told by my dad I could do anything. So I went and did the performing arts, and then that became music, and then that became the violin, and then that became Baroque violin, because I loved all that early music stuff. I didn't know that those doors actually had no working class women allowed, because I didn't read that. So I ended up in this really rarefied atmosphere in Holland amongst this international elite, and I hadn't a clue. Honestly, I remember that naivety now. Didn't know where I was, but it's where I wanted to be. Anyway. Anybody else here studied performing arts? Any aspect of it? Okay, so apart from your normal lectures, you have to practice your instrument and be in a choir and be in an orchestra. And if you're doing drama as well, you need to be in a play. And if you're doing dance, you need to do your dance classes. So politics took a bit of a backseat, I have to say. Although, you know, I'd ended up in Holland. I'd studied in York and London, and then I'd gone to Holland to teach music, and then I'd decided on this specialisation. So I was in Rotterdam, at the Conservatoire in Rotterdam. So it was as far away from working class politics as you could imagine, let's put it that way. And I was living in Delft with 16 others in a kind of a student commune. And I remember vividly the day that I heard the term mutually assured destruction for the first time. And I was hanging up my washing in the communal laundry area. There was a telly on in the background. And, you know, it was got kind of, what? And then I watched, and I was absolutely horrified. I mean, it really was mad. You know, that's what the letter stood for. And I walked out into the common room and said, why didn't anybody tell me? Well, you know, why don't I know about this? I was really shocked that the world could have got to that stage, because I wasn't any stranger to political activism. I was brought up with it. My granny was a founder member of the Communist Party in Manchester. My dad and her were both Labour councillors. I'd been door knocking since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, shoving Labour leaflets through through letterboxes. My dad was the chair of CND. I was in the Young Communist League at 14. We were raising money for a children's hospital in Vietnam. Why didn't I know that the world had got to this place where it had enough weaponry to blow itself up several times? Anyway, I'd also been to see the War Game at the age of 14, and I don't know if anybody, hands up if you got to see the War Game. All right, so absolute seminal moment, and it was banned. Those that don't know, it was a film about the nuclear holocaust, and the BBC deemed it unfit for human consumption. So these were like banned screenings. I mean, banned screenings. Even that, you know, so that was normal to me. But for 10 years, whilst I'd, the studying, and it had all gone, I'd taken my eye off the ball. Here I was about to launch an international career, and the world was about to blow itself up. So that felt like a bit nuts, and I realised I had to do something. So I got involved in Holland and Germany. The peace movement then, 1980-81, was massive. I had no idea what was happening in the UK at all. But, I remember going to this massive rally in Bonn and climbing up on the railings, and there was this vast sea of people all singing We Shall Overcome. And I thought, well, there you go, there's that many people that know. I didn't, but they do, so we're all right. I really had no idea what a big, long, hard-fought battle it would be. And, of course, we're still fighting it, but, let's take Cruz as a win part way through that battle. Anyway, I was, at the time, also beginning to be frustrated because I hadn't realised I would end up amongst this very rarefied bunch of people in tiny little churches playing with a Baroque ensemble to those who knew what that music was. And you know, the rest of the week I joined a political theatre group which was called Barord, which means to agitate. And we were in church halls with the refugees from Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Chile, because at the time Latin America was fighting all the American-backed wars. So it was two completely contrasting worlds. And into that world walked my Irish violin playing friend Mary, who said, I'm coming through Holland, can I stay with you? And I said, yes, sure, what are you coming for? And she said, well, I've given up my violin teaching job and I'm going to walk to Moscow for peace. So my face did what your face did. What are you on about? Anyway, the walk was coming through Amsterdam. Mary had hosted them when this group of peace activists had walked through Manchester, because she was in Manchester CND, and she decided to spend some time with them. So she got to me and she said, when they get to Amsterdam, they haven't got anywhere to stay, because this bunch of people was moving from place to place, making it up as it went along. So I found them a squat in Amsterdam to stay in, and took Mary there, dropped her off for the night, and was invited to stay and join the party. And I mean, I've done this ever since. If ever I have a party, I insist, even though I'm a performer, I insist that everybody does something, because we've all got something to offer, even if it's to tell a joke, you know. And it was one of those, circle. And this bloke called Alex had been on the walk for 2 years, and he was about to leave. And he said, I don't know how to explain what this has meant to me, but here we go. And he put his head back and he let out this primal scream. And I'd never heard anything like that, but it sent shivers up and down the spine. And I thought, I want a bit of whatever that is, because it felt like life and death. It felt visceral. It felt absolutely real. And I thought, you know what? Every August I go off travelling. Why not join this lot? And that was it. I mean, it sounds nuts, but it was literally, yeah, I haven't got any concerts in August, I'll join this lot. So I arranged to meet them wherever they'd got to, because they were going to carry on, obviously. I went back to getting on with the concerts I had, and got a visa ready for Czechoslovakia and Poland, because I didn't know where they'd be. And anyway, it got to August the 6th, and I set off to join the walk to Moscow. I mean, there were mainly a group of Americans. They'd been walking for 2 years. They'd walked across the states, and wherever they'd gone, they talked about peace and disarmament and the arms race and how ridiculous it was. And they got to Washington, talked to the bigwigs there, who said, go and tell the Russians, you wouldn't be able to do it now, would you? And they were a very determined bunch, and so they decided to try. And that was how the walk to Moscow had happened. Anyway, as I say, I you know, what an experience it was. There were kind of 4 parts to the journey. The first bit, from the August to the December, was realising that the walk had been stalled at the border. We got as far as the Iron Curtain, but I don't know if anybody did try to travel in the 80s behind the Iron Curtain, but you needed visas. And there were, like, at any point, about 8 different nationalities. That's a lot of organising to do. And we might have been able to get visas to go, say, into East Germany. But if you didn't then have the ones to go through Hungary or Czechoslovakia or Poland, you would be constantly going backwards and forwards. So because it was being made up as we went along, nobody really understood this. And when I went there and joined them, thinking I was going to walk, I found this bunch of people stuck in a field on a recreation ground somewhere in Bavaria, waiting and trying to figure out how on earth to get from there to Moscow, with autumn and then winter approaching in what is known as Little Siberia. So it wasn't what I planned, but what I did find was really interesting. I'll tell you about that. And then from the December onwards, I decided to go back to the UK, December to April, because all of this was done without any funding. That needed sorted, so I thought I'd be much more use back in England trying to raise some money, which I did. And then I went back in the May, and the walk part was actually from May till September. So what had started out as a 1-month vacation, once I was in, I mean, you couldn't walk away. It was something that once you were there, you had to finish. Well, I did, I'm like that. So it was an experiment as much as anything else in living differently. The philosophy behind the group was that nuclear weapons are in fact the manifestation of a lack of trust between people. And we lived according to non-violent direct action principles. There was a lot written about it at the time. Something that we as feminists, if there are any of the feminists in the room, I'm making an assumption there, it's a familiar way of working, small cells, groups that you get on with, all networking together, no leaders, so you can't actually ever destroy the movements. But affinity groups, consensus, all of those sorts of things. And the feeling was there was no point in just getting rid of nuclear weapons, because if the root cause hadn't been tackled, they would just re-emerge in some other form. So we had to live paying attention to how conflict arose between us and how it could be resolved without recourse to violence. And I have to say that we could probably do with some of that again, because there's an awful lot of unresolved conflict and tension in any group that I'm part of. It seems that we've forgotten those lessons, or maybe we never learned them properly. But, you know, what we found is when we got into, you know, we did eventually get behind the Iron Curtain, was that the peace movement in each country we walked through was funded by the state. And that was really peculiar, because obviously CND wasn't, and all the individual women's peace groups and all the rest of it weren't. So how come the very countries that were our enemies had peace committees? What was all that about? And it took us a while to realise that we were talking at cross purposes. They were very glad to host us in Czechoslovakia, Poland and the Soviet Union, which is what it was in those days, were very happy to host us. But their version of peace was strong defence. So where we had a dove, and our banner that we carried had a broken gun, you know, as its symbol in the middle, they had a tank. And it was, yes, we want peace. And there were pictures everywhere of happy children and, you know, lovely, peaceful doves and rainbows and all sorts of things with a tank in front of them. Because you can't have this unless you've got that. So, I mean, it was fascinating having this dialogue and being feted as, you know, the peace movement, sitting with people that in this country or in our capitalist world we would have seen as warmongers, you know. And we know that they are at the moment, although I can't say they, because that was the Soviet Union, this is Russia. It's two different things. There's a, you know, 40 years is an awful long time on the geopolitical stage. So anyway, just some of the little moments. I mentioned that we couldn't go anywhere. We were living on a recreation ground, and there was always a rotating leader, and the leader wasn't a leader, it was a coordinator. And you had 2 weeks as the coordinator, and then it was the next person. And there was then also a team that would be out in front, working out where to next. Possibly they were meeting, you know, a peace group somewhere to arrange accommodation or, you know, sort out the infrastructure. And whilst I was there getting to know the group, some others were wandering around the Bavarian countryside trying to find somewhere to live. And we found Thomas Hoppedietzel, who was this wonderful 87-year-old German man, a farmer who, when Germany was partitioned after the war, had lost half his land. So he sowed his crops up to this barrier, and there was East Germany, and he was right up to the line. It was fascinating, and he totally agreed with the, you know, the message that we were taking with us. So we built a peace camp, and we became a centre for lots of the peace movement would come to where we were. And, you know, in the evenings, I used to meditate in those days, and I'd go about 6 o'clock every night to meditate, and my shadow would be in Czechoslovakia. I mean, it was totally weird, living right up against that reminder of how we divided things. There was a tree in the middle of this place called Dreiländerecke, Ecke, and there were the 3 countries there, and the branches stretched into each country, and the birds flew into each country, and yet we were kept out, and there were these massive watchtowers all the way along. I mean, it was bonkers, absolutely bonkers. Anyway, one of the things that happened is we used to have feelings meetings and business meetings, which were always circles. People would take it in turn. Very hippy-dippy when I think about it now. At the time I didn't realise, but this particular day, a woman called Carol Bellin, a filmmaker from New York, she got up and she said, she was one of the few out lesbians on the walk, and she said, I would like there to be a women-only space because I'm losing sense of my lesbian self and my lesbian sensibilities. And, you know, there was probably about 50-50, men and women, on this walk. And I stood up and argued her down. She says, looking at me. And I just said, this is ridiculous. We're walking to Moscow to break down the boundaries between East and West, and here you are erecting them between the men and women on the walk, and that's not okay. And the blokes basically said, Paula, we can fight our own battles, thank you very much. We don't have a problem with the women-only space. Well, I did. Anyway, it so happened that the tent that I was sleeping in, by default, it was a very big tent. I woke up the next morning and that was the women-only space. And I rolled out my sleeping bag and kind of shuffled over because there was a bunch of women in the corner having this meeting. And I was gobsmacked. Honestly, the qualitative difference as to how those women were communicating with each other was something I'd never come across. And these women had sat in the big meetings, hardly ever saying anything. Yeah, I mean, I can hear the sneer in my voice now. You know, they were fine for getting the cakes and, you know, clearing up a bit, making the fires, but I mean, they didn't have much to offer. Seriously, this is why I know it's possible to change, because I really thought those things. And some of the women nowadays, who we wish could understand the need to understand what sex-based rights for women are, may well be where I was, you know, because until you've experienced it, you don't know. Anyway, that was it. I decided that I had to find out. I said, why haven't you brought these ideas to the meetings? And Sherry, a very gentle Midwesterner, she said, well, actually, Paul, it's sometimes difficult to get a word in edgeways. Not just the blokes, she said, but, you know, people like you. Right? That's me told. So I had a silence fast for 48 hours. And it was one of the most life-changing moments because I learned through listening that I never ever had an original idea. Not once did I have an original idea. I just had them quicker than other people. And I'd still sat in on the meetings and I'd be going, it's obvious we need to do this. Come on, somebody say it. And eventually, you know, probably about 5 seconds into my frustration, somebody would say what I thought was a truly original idea. No, it wasn't. So anyway, I was greatly chastened by that experience, and it was wonderful to know that there was this other perspective. And that was the first seed of understanding what the women-only thing was. So anyway, then, you know, as I said, I decided to go back to England. And I travelled on the 11th of December 1982. And for some of you, you might remember that on the 12th of December 1982, there was the Embrace the Base demonstration at Greenham Common. And I've been told en route that there was this peace event thing happening somewhere in Berkshire. Literally, I had no idea. And so I turned up with my rucksack, hitchhiking, which is the way we all travelled in those days. And, there was a lot of people heading that way, a lot of cars and, you know, others walking. And I got there and said to a random woman, is there anywhere I could leave my rucksack? And she said, yes, that's my car. You can stash it in there. And then I thought, right, here we go. Now what? And I looked at the base and a woman walked past dressed as a witch with a hat and, you know, proper dressing up. Thought she looks like she knows what she's doing. And I went over to her and I said, hello, so what do we do then? And she said, well, why are you here? And I said, to embrace the base. And she said, well, there it is, get on with it. And marched off. And I thought, well, they don't know what they're doing either. You know, I mean, it was that thing that, I don't know why, given that we were making up walking to Moscow, why did I think anyone else would know what to do? Anyway, those of you that were there will know that that was a life-changing event for loads of us. For me, all the bits, the cognitive dissonance that had been going on, kind of everything slotted together, and I thought, oh, this feels really right. There's something essential about this that's different. Anyway, so I spent a few days at Greenham, loved it, and knew that something had happened to me. My dad spotted it when I got back. He said, they've got you, haven't they, Paula? He always was a bit far-sighted, my dad. Anyway, I stayed in Corby, raised a load of money, and then there was also in the April 83, there was the big Easter demo. There was a big long chain that went from Burfield to Greenham. some nodding heads there. So coaches went from Corby like they did from everywhere else, and that was a great event. But we were already arguing about it in Corby. Should there be a women-only section? And nobody understood it. There was a real tension around that question, but it was already raised back then. I headed back to Germany, and it was fascinating watching the people in the village where the walk had ended up moving from the peace camp into a lovely ancient water mill that a German ecologist had gifted us. He just said, that building's standing derelict, you can have it. So that's where they'd overwintered. And it was a tiny little village, and this is Bavaria. I don't know if anybody knows Germany at all, but Gruß Gott. I mean, this is proper.
Oh, yes, I know.
Yes, very. I mean, very. Oh, I was just going to check. Can I say Tory? Of course, I can say it's a Labour event. I can say that. It was German Tories, basically. Very, very, very. Like that. Yeah. And no, it was just you had the face. You were copying my face, and that was it. They were very severe.
Switzerland.
Oh right, okay.
Where the more conservative areas do that as well.
That thing, Gruß Gott, yeah. Well, you can imagine what they felt like with all of these weirdo peace activists from all over the world, kept converging on their little village and doing odd things in the mill. Anyway, I knew we'd been accepted the day I was given a bag of broken biscuits by the baker. So I went in and did my Gruß Gott thing, and the whole shop went silent. And I thought, oh God, you want to sniff your armpits. It really didn't feel that we were very welcome. And then I bought the bread, and then he handed me this thing of broken biscuits, and I nearly cheered, because we'd got somewhere. The day we crossed over into Czechoslovakia, we crossed from the village because there was, as I say, we were right on the border, and the Polizei were there, everybody cheering us on, and they bought into this. These people are going to try and go over there, and how are they going to do it? And the first person I met in Czechoslovakia was a young lad sitting on the wall, dangling his legs, wearing designer gear, and it completely confused me because I don't know if anybody else had this, but we were trying to get in there, but we didn't know anything about it because it really was an Iron Curtain. There was not you might have got Soviet Weekly or something like that with a kind of sanctioned version of what might be happening in the great, workers' paradise, but there was very little fact known about what was going on there. So I don't know what I expected to find, but these were like just ordinary people doing ordinary things, looking just like us, Anyway, I'm going to jump a bit. What we used to do is we would walk, talk to people. There would be events. We'd go to speak to a youth group or what have you, and I'm saying speak. I can't remember what language any of this happened in. There must have been some sort of translation, but in my head it's all in English, and it can't have been. But it is 40 years, so bear with me. My job became negotiating, and there were 3 of us taking it in turns. We were all music graduates, Mary, myself, and a horn player called Peter. And we've never understood why, except that possibly it's about communication, and we had a smattering of languages between us. But it was very peculiar that of all of those people from all those different countries, we were the 3 that used to be sent off to negotiate. So there I am in a town now called Ostrava, which is right on the border between Czechoslovakia and Poland. And we thought we were going to go right the way through because we'd been negotiating with the Polish Peace Committee. And they'd said, yes, you're very welcome. We'll grant you the visas, la, la, la. So I went to pick them up. And I don't know if you've had any dealings with the bureaucracy of Eastern Europe before. Did anybody try and travel anywhere? Yeah. But think of the worst ever customer service here, times it by about 500 and add a bit more, and you kind of get in there. Because there is no customer service. Because they've all got jobs, everybody worked, you couldn't be sacked. So there was no incentive to be good at what you do. And it was a nice skin of their nose. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. I don't care. And it was so funny watching the Americans try to deal with this because it was so different. Anyway, Mr. Slomka was the man that I was trying to see, and I remember seeing him sitting about where you're sitting, and there was a glass partition, and finally it's your turn. Hello, I'd like to see Mr. Slomka. I've got an appointment. Mr. Slomka is absent. He's sitting there in front of you. Honestly, it was so frustrating. Anyway, this particular day, I kept going until they finally let me in. And this woman came to see me, and she listened. I explained about the walk, that we had a list of sanctioned visas, and I'd come to pick them up. And then she said, now, this lady who's from Canada, she must go to Montreal to pick up her visa, and this lady, she must go to Dublin to get hers. And she went right the way through. She could have been on a Guess the Capital City quiz, because I was quite impressed. But no, we haven't got your visas. And I knew that this wasn't true, because it was the most frustrating. Anyway, I'm very tenacious, and I said, I'm not going anywhere till I get the visas. So they physically threw me out. So I still wasn't giving up. So I went in a back entrance and found this bloody woman. She was the tea lady. She was the tea lady who was serving tea now in another part of the building. And she saw me come in and, looked mildly sheepish. I've got nowhere near Mr. Slomka. This was Anyway, we didn't get those visas. And it meant that there was all these, can you imagine it, all the people on the walk. The number kept changing all the time because people in different countries would come and join us. And once we were behind the Iron Curtain, they could travel freely. So we had some Hungarians, some East Germans, or what have you, would come. They would take their holiday and come and join us. So, it was a logistical nightmare. I'm saying this to you now and thinking, did we really do that? And we did. So we had to leave because you can't be there if you haven't got a visa. Off everybody went to Vienna. And there was a brief encounters moment, literally just like the film. We had to get the train going that way to Vienna, and one of our number had managed to get a visa to get into Poland. And his train was coming that way. They crossed and stopped at the station. I ran across the bridge, handed him over all the money for the visas, and he went that way, and I ran, got on the train and went that way. And it was the brief encounters film I'm referring to. It was like that because it was old trains as well. It's amazing. Anyway, eventually we got our visas to Poland, and we started at Auschwitz. The Polish Peace Committee had told, it felt like the whole of Poland. We had constant visits for the whole 2 weeks that we were there. We were set on as the maintainers of the memorial there. I don't know somebody here must have been to Auschwitz. Nobody been? But go at least once in your life. Seriously, that's another life-changing thing. There's a big monument. We were set on as cleaners of the monument, and people would come and talk to us. It was amazing. And then the other thing in Poland that got us very involved with what was happening, this was just before martial law in Poland, and the banned trade union movement, Solidarność, was in dire straits at the time. And they have every year a pilgrimage. Lots of people walk to a place called Częstochowa, which has got a monastery with a black Madonna, and it's a great spiritual thing. As you know, it's a Catholic country. And it was like a mini Glastonbury when I got there. There were all these tents everywhere, and a great vibe. Somehow or other, my sleeping bag got stolen. So, no, maybe not stolen, maybe borrowed, I'm not quite sure, but it wasn't where it should have been. And I went to complain or to find out what I could do, and ended up in the basement with these nuns. And it was all run by nuns. And they were completely radical. It was amazing. When I told them what I was doing and what I was part of, one of them wrapped a Bible in disguise and said, please give this to my friend. She lives opposite the KGB headquarters in Moscow. And so I smuggled a Bible into the Soviet Union. It was nutty. But, it felt like a real story thread to take through. And while we were sitting there having this conversation, these burly blokes would march through the undercroft of this incredible monastery with boxes of stuff. And this was the Solidarność leaders. This is where they hung out. It sounds like a film. It felt like being in a film. So, Poland was amazing, I have to say. We got arrested at one point, which was also peculiar, because I say it was coming up to martial law, and what they were doing, when you impose martial law, or any secret service type thing, you need extra people to do it, don't you? I've often thought that if you've got a secret service following you around, you need twice as many population. So I don't know how they do it. What they did in Poland is they recruited basically the hooligans and thugs off the streets and gave them a white truncheon. So you knew who these lot were because they had white truncheons. Anyway, we'd been invited to this peace event, we'd been told. So we all turned up thinking it was going to be what they said, forgetting this act of translation. What it was a march past of all the military hardware in the area. And there they were all marching, and we thought, oh, we can't be part of this. So we did one of those huddles, anybody that's been on a blockade, you know, and you have to quickly get together and decide what to do. And we decided we had to turn our backs. So we did, which of course you can imagine from a militarist point of view is an absolute show of disrespect. So before we knew it, we were being arrested. So with full fanfare of, you know, that whole thing that people do where they go floppy so that they'll be heavy, and when you're being arrested, resist arrest in different ways. I had my flipping dictionary and was going, we've been invited, you know, we trust a white bloke with a white truncheon. Anyway, we spent the day trying to get out of that. And at the end of it, there we go, at the end of it, we were, I mean, it was really weird. They said, why are you doing what you're doing? And we unfurled the banner and they all agreed. It, you know, it didn't make any sense that we'd spent the time in this, you know, police holding thing. So we went back to where we had been earlier that day, and lo and behold, there was nothing to be seen. No signs of you know, all the trestle tables had gone, and there was this little tank in the middle of this tank statue. So I remember climbing up on somebody's shoulders and sticking these flowers down the end of the tank. And then the locals all came out, and there was shortages in Poland at the time. So you had what there was, strawberries and tomatoes. There were loads of, there was nothing else. Vodka. Yeah, there was vodka. And that night, we ended up at a place where I remember I was getting out of the van and there was a man kind of beckoning me to go, you know, clearly, come with me. And I thought, well, I'm not heading off to the woods with you. I don't know what you want. I took somebody with me. And in the middle of that little bit of woodland was the Polish Communist Party for that area, sitting around on trestle tables, laden with a lot more than strawberries and tomatoes, I can tell you. And they'd wanted to apologise to us. They'd been sitting on the podium, they'd seen us being arrested, couldn't intervene somehow, but they, you know, they were mortified because we had been invited. So that's the sort of adventures we got up to. We got to Warsaw, the same thing had happened. The Soviet Peace Committee hadn't tied it together, so everybody had to leave, apart from Mary and I, who got on a train and went to Moscow. And when we got to Moscow, that is when we met the dissidents. Because at that time, there were a group of academics who were trying to challenge Gorbachev, and this is when Perestroika was all happening. And it turns out that the Carmen, who was one of the women that started the March to Greenham, had been in 1981. And that's when it's kind of like the Greenham bit was beginning to make sense to me. They all thought that I must know Carmen because she was a vegetable as well. No, she was a vegetarian, but they'd never met a vegetarian. It was great. And the worst thing happened, we were there in this flat in Moscow talking to the dissidents, and we were listening to the BBC World Service, which was banned. And it makes me think of what's happening in Moscow right now. Because you know, it's like it was. There is no news coming across one way or another. So there we were listening to this radio, and the Korean airliner got shot down. That was September 1983. And there was Mary and I on the receiving end of the nuclear arsenal from the rest of the world. And on the BBC World Service, it was talking about this is a deliberate provocation, this might be the start of World War III, talking it up big style, very scary, talking about closing the borders. In Moscow, there was nothing. One paragraph on the back page of Pravda to say a Korean airliner entered Soviet airspace and was brought down. That was the end of it. We were walking around, nobody knew. We knew, and we'd got our visas sorted, we'd got the whole trip sorted, but the rest of the walkers were on the wrong side of the bloody border. So we went back to where we were meant to meet up at these vast distances. I mean, I'm saying this as if I'm talking about going from Belford to Derby. You're talking about going through Ukraine and Belarus to meet the walkers, and we got there and they weren't there. And we had 2 days on our own in a campsite in Minsk, not knowing what was happening. No mobile phones. I mean, this was like, I don't know how we did it, actually, because I mean, there must have been phone boxes. I remember trying to place a call in Warsaw and going into one of those little cubicles and waiting, almost that dialer thing, you know, we'll put you through, love. A bit like that. That's the kind of level of technology we're talking about. Somehow or other, 2 days later, Mary and I are working out, are we going to have to do it on our own? After all of this, are we really the only two left in this chain of events? Anyway, they turned up. They didn't know what was happening either, because what had happened is they'd been travelling in the luggage van and they'd had a puncture. That's all that had happened, something really pedestrian like that, but they were late by 2 days. I mean, it was crazy. Anyway, this was the walk to Moscow. And at the end of it, it ended all rather suddenly, and my mother was very poorly, and the call came through, and I decided I had to come back because, you know, this is the time I needed to be back. And I have to say, the culture shock of coming back to a working class town in 1983, just before the miners' strike, Thatcher's Britain, post-industrial collapse, as Carol mentioned, Corby had been the great steel town, and we were suffering hugely from the effects of that. Mass unemployment, low-wage economy. I mean, it was just a nightmare. And I came back into that, and I had 12 weeks visiting my mum daily until she did finally die. And this massive world stage that I'd been part of suddenly condensed, diminished to this tiny little domestic world. My sister was pregnant at the time, and she was a single parent mother of Emma, who was 3. And somehow or other, we came to the arrangement that I would co-parent. So without any pregnancy to prepare me, the end of December, Daniel, there I was, we had two deaths, a birth and a marriage in 1 month. And I mean, you know, life suddenly became about something very different. And what happened very quickly for me, once the initial stage of grief passed, I mean, December 83 passed. There was an even bigger demo at Greenham. I don't know if anybody went to reflect the base, but that was even bigger. I didn't even know, obviously I didn't. I was in 1 week, I mean, Daniel was 4 days old at the time, you know, but it tells me immediately that the way women get involved is largely dictated to by our circumstances, by our physical circumstances. So we ended up, very quickly, we were involved with the miners' wives support group. We were doing what we could, went to the big rally in Birmingham, the big conference in Birmingham. I don't know if anybody was at that, but it was organised along traditional trade union lines, and top table, everything, subsection 1-0, you know, you and your rule book, you know it off by heart, don't you? It's like, I can't deal with it. I can't even say it because it doesn't make any sense. And this structure was being imposed on these angry, desperate women who were saying, my washing machine's broken, we haven't got any food, my Johnny needs a school uniform, well, we'll pass a motion and this person will do it. So I remember saying, excuse me, I thought this was a women's conference. I really didn't mean to be troublesome. I just needed an explanation. And I was told very clearly where to go. So I said, oh, well, I'll leave you to it then. Walked out, followed by this huge amount of women who were feeling like I was. So there we were in the lobby, and before we knew it, we had little teams doing that thing. Is anybody else from Derby? Right, Derbyshire women, you lot get over there, right? Anybody from Nottingham, you know, and everybody teamed up. You've got a sister pit, really. We'll support that pit. And I remember handing over our money we'd collected to actually one of the Derbyshire lot. Took our money, and they were the ones that needed a washing machine. You know, and it was a very different, more immediate way of organising. We ended up in Corby. We formed a women's centre in 1986 that ran until 2014. We got involved, Corby Women for Peace, used to go up and down to Greenham in a minibus to study local dialects, I think was my excuse, to get it out the adult education service, you know. And really, what I discovered was that the things that we'd done on the walk to Moscow in terms of that small cell organising was the way women did it naturally, really. And I've gone over time, so I'm not going to go on very much, but I do want to bring it, to finish, I want to bring it back to the fact that the doomsday clock now stands at 90 seconds to midnight. War ends through negotiations. The only winners is the arms trade. And I'm still anti-war. And I'd like to finish with a poem. And I wrote this when Theresa May came to power. And I mean, that was the 20th of July 2016 when I wrote this. And I read it to myself the other day and I thought, who am I talking about in this poem? Who is this leader? And I realised that there have been so many. We've had this turbulent, ridiculous thing going on, haven't we? So much so, it was a war, it was a leader, and it could have been written at any time in the last 15 years, which is shocking. Anyway, I've worked out that it was about Theresa May and a certain Jeremy Corbyn. So let me just read it to you. There we go. It's called Post-Trident Thunder. Hailstones the size of frozen peas are dancing on my balcony. Hurled from furious heavens, are these Gaia's tears of rage that our leaders seem hell-bent on her destruction, stockpiling and renewing enough nuclear power and weapons to destroy the earth? See how puny we are when caught in a hailstorm. Bedraggled, unprepared, bare summer skin stinging with the assault. Nothing compared to the horrors in store if our new leader gleefully presses the button when the nuclear winter falls. And still the weather battles on, sun now forcing through, pushing the grey, heaped masses of fury to one side. Bright, yes, but as naught compared to the blinding light of a nuclear explosion. And the heat. We've complained all day, wilting like lettuce leaves as we try desperately to keep cool, to find shade. This intense heat would be mild compared to the raging fires and instant incineration we would suffer if that button were pressed. The button that Obama took with him to Hiroshima. This vile obscenity has corrupted our morality. Perversely, conventional wisdom now considers the man who would refuse to destroy the earth as weak, unelectable, not a leader, a threat to the nation's security, whilst lauding and applauding the woman with eyes of steel as a powerful, effective leader. Come, mighty storms, keep us alert, remind us of your power, shake us out of our complacency. You, Mother Earth, are unelectable, not to be bought for £25 a time to have a say in your future. The deadline is past, the die is cast, and I choose life. There you go.